More often than not, you should not adjust your messaging. Okay, that's really interesting because we think about this rapid iteration and feedback loop and continuous improvement. It's very important that the organization does not change messaging because the organization is bored. It takes a long time to build up mental models in our buyers, to build the brand elements, and actually start to nurture the market. You don't want to change that just because you're bored.
I'm Devin Reed.
And I'm Sheena Badani.
And you're watching Reveal, the Revenue Intelligence podcast powered by Gong.
Keep watching here to see the full interview. Or if you like to listen to podcasts on the go, check out the links in the description below.
And if you like what you hear, subscribe on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, or Spotify, or all of them. Why not? And while you're there, make sure to leave us a 5-star review. We personally read every single one, and I think I speak for both of us when I say they mean the world to us.
Could not agree more, Devin. Now, without further ado, here's the episode you've been waiting for.
Tony, what's going on? Thank you for hanging out with me.
Oh, happy to be here for this fake cup of coffee today, Devin.
Well, few people know, Tony, and I don't even know if you know this, but I consider you one of the very few that got away in my sales career because the way we initially met was trying to sell you Gong at a previous company. Yeah. And despite both of us doing fantastic work, it didn't quite work out, but we remained friends. And so when I had the opportunity to get you on the show, I was excited, truly excited.
You know, it's really interesting. And very rarely do you find a person who you're trying to sell to who builds, I think I had a 17-page business case that we built out. But it was a tremendous lesson because I was a very eager coach, and unbeknownst to me, the decision process continued beyond my leader and actually went to our chief product officer. So it was a very interesting learning, I think, for both of us around how sometimes your buyer may have the right intentions, maybe telling you everything they know, but doesn't have the juice that they think they do. That was me. So when you said, should we jam? I said, man, I owe this guy probably about 20-something hours. So what's 30 minutes?
Well, it's okay because me and you are friends. We both learned a lot, and we all know we lose more than we win. So in the game of sales, so it's all good. But I'm excited to chat with you today because we're going to talk about how to adjust sales messaging in the field and talk about a lot of go-to-market motions here. So, many sales leaders are looking at what's happening in the market right now and wondering if they should adjust their messaging, or maybe it's many have already kicked off a project to start to modify based on some of the economic headwinds and things of the like. So let's just kind of start off with why, Tony. Like, why is it so important for sales teams to adjust their messaging today?
Cool. So I think I'll start with I'll kind of play devil's advocate a bit here. More often than not, you should not adjust your messaging. Okay, that's really interesting because we think about this rapid iteration and feedback loop and continuous improvement. But from my experience with companies that scale, and just maybe I can give a couple companies, Devin, to ground people on like the scale of the organizations I've been part of, if that's going to be helpful. Cool. So I've worked in 2 companies ago. I ran product marketing for a company called Percolate. Percolate's since been rolled up into the Seismic family of offerings. Percolate, we sold what we thought was a system of record, or think of it as like Salesforce for your marketing organization that organized all of your content so you could plan, create, publish, and analyze. It's an omnichannel marketing platform. From there, like I said, I was a seller for a little bit. I then got roped into doing this sales effectiveness, sales enablement role. And then finally, in my final run there, I was running all of product marketing. So I had a global team. So when it comes to messaging, that matters a lot to me. At Percolate, when I left, I think we maybe had 40 sellers, which for me was really big at the time. But then after leaving Percolate, I went over and spent 3.5 years at a company called Datadog, which was a really excellent company. It's one of those like lottery tickets that you happen to pull, and you just really have to evolve to stay along for the ride. When I showed up, we were maybe still rather large, 100 and let's say actually I think it was 97 sellers, doing around 135 million in ARR, so a good business. When I left just under 3 years later, we were 370 sellers and we crossed the $1 billion revenue mark. Caught an IPO. And I had some really great leaders on the journey, and they taught me a lot about scale, which scale and enablement. So I think as we're going through this context, that's going to be important. Currently, I'm at a company called Airtable, another great PLG company, starting to really step into how do we actually take PLG and sit next to that, your traditional enterprise sales motion, and make sense of it all. But where that really matters is changing and scaling, right? When it comes to messaging, my first thing is you kind of want to resist the temptation to rapidly innovate core messaging once you've published it live. Okay, so once it's out in the field, let it sit. And then you want to look for a couple cues that really say, hey, it's time to make a change.
What are those cues?
Yeah, exactly. So no problem. I think one of the main cues is like when you start to notice that people are creating their own decks, right? When people are creating their own decks, sometimes that's great because it's showing that they understand and can configure it to the customers. Like, great, this is a savvy sales professional who is contextualizing the message for the customer. But you start to realize that when decks from an individual, maybe Devin, you make a deck, and then all of a sudden for me, I notice that deck is showing up in our European team or showing up in other teams. There's probably a little bit of a disconnect. And sometimes the slides that are the favorites from the sellers may not actually be the direction that you need to move the messaging in. But I really view it as an indicator that something has either shifted in the market or something is resonating more with the sellers. And when I start to see that, you then start going on a bit of a listening tour. So that's something that, like, if you're a revenue leader or if you're on the enablement side, you kind of always have your antenna up for. So we're looking for that as a bit of a reactive. But then the other main things or the obvious things here is like when you have a major business shift, like if you have an acquisition or a dramatic new product launch, or I know a lot of people are doing category creation, at least that's the aim.
Yep.
When those happen, you need to go back to your fundamental question. And then also, I think that many people here who are having this question now is economic downturn. Do we need to adjust our positioning a little bit in our messaging? Those are kind of the signs when to. But let me tell you, like, a sign not to change, right? Again, the product marketer in me, man, like, it's very important that the organization does not change messaging because the organization is bored. I'll like double click. Like, I think that like, it's like, oh, we rolled out a new aesthetic of our slide or a new branding guideline. And instead of just changing the branding elements in the deck or in the messaging, you kind of do an overhaul. It takes a long time to build up mental models in our buyers, to build the brand elements, and actually start to nurture the market. You don't want to change that just because you're bored. And that happens a lot in organizations. So that's kind of like the when not to.
That's interesting. Okay, so let's get into it a little bit more. So I think like, and maybe you want to get into it more for like right now, right? Because like, I think it does make sense. Here's my hunch. Companies should at least consider it right now, which is like review, where's their audience at today? And does that messaging have any maybe now rough edges or maybe just blatant parts like, hey, this is completely outdated, right? Like, I don't know, if you're an onboarding platform, people aren't onboarding as many new reps right now, right? So you might not want to put, maybe if that was your primary message, you really pull it back, cut it all together. So do you kind of have like, I don't know, any advice for maybe how to kind of just to do that review to decide if it even makes sense to change right now?
Well, I think that there's two things there, right? If we use this onboarding example you're pulling up, there's the larger question of, do we adjust product? Like, do we turn on, if we're the onboarding tool, do we like, we're now not onboarding, but our story is ongoing enablement so that you reduce the risk, right? But ultimately, your value prop has to have the three value drivers that exist for every business: make more, spend less, de-risk. So if you have the onboarding, you can talk about, messaging as we know that the cost of acquiring is higher now and the rates are higher now. So how do you make sure that anybody coming in has the optimal experience so you're not burning cash on that individual? How do you de-risk the onboarding of a new person and get them ramped up more clearly? So that example would be not making a dramatic shift to your messaging, but instead just tailoring it more to the business value. I think whether we're in a recession, we're not in a recession, to be debated, to be seen, like technically depending on what definition you're going with. But we live in a world where sloppy selling ain't going to cut it anymore. right? So like the fish jumping in the boat, I think that's going to start to slow. And it's cool if you've made a sales career off of that, and some products will still persist and you'll be able to do that. But if you've ever been looking for a signal, if you're a seller out there and you're ever saying, okay, should I take this profession seriously, man? Right? Should I invest in this as like a noble profession of sales, one that I need to like really learn my craft? What you're going to see happening is, you're going to start to see this like this sorting, this natural sorting of those sellers who have started to drink the Kool-Aid and started going outbound, started talking to value, started entering deals higher or closer to decision makers. That's going to be more relevant, right? And those people are going to survive and be less affected in this time. And what's interesting is those individuals, when they're up against the traditional competition with somebody who maybe is just like the product sells itself, those savvy sellers will win more deals. So there's going to be a sorting. And I deviated a little bit, but there's a whole lot of behavior that if at any point we want to talk about that, I think that's really where my specialty is the change management side of things. But if we do get back to the like, how do you evaluate? We can definitely talk about that and kind of like mental checklists, who you involve. Like that's probably a fair place to spend some time if you want.
Yeah, for sure. Let's get to the kitchen, which is who's cooking, right? So who's involved. So on the marketing side lately in my career, I joke that the most difficult thing in the business to get approved is the homepage copy. Right? What goes on the homepage? Because there's, the CEO, head of marketing, you might have some copywriters, product marketing, sales. It's really challenging. I have to imagine sales script, sales messaging has to probably be number 2 on the other, from a sales point of view. So who do you get involved, Tony? Like I imagine you are, but like who else? And I'd even like to know, like, I don't know, you don't have to go so deep as Rapid, but like who's really in charge? Who's like the final say, who's the input, who's approving, that sort of thing.
Yeah. Final say is ranking sales professional if we're talking about a sales deck.
Okay. Let's do sales. Let's say sales. Yeah. Sales deck, sales messaging. Let's just run with that one.
Yeah. Your final say is the sales leader. We got to keep in mind who our customer is when you're building assets. And from my product marketing days, my enablement days, ultimately you want the sign off from the leader, the ranking leader. That's what's going to matter. Yep. But who's involved? Who are the cooks? You must have a really good partnership with your marketing and product marketing team. I've been privileged to work with some amazing individuals and some amazing marketing teams in my time here at Airtable and even back at Datadog and at Percolate. But you have to have alignment with marketing. Marketing on their own could kind of go off and it could be very heady, very theoretical, very academic, right? And that's one of the things that makes marketing so great is that they understand this longer term vision. They know where they're going with product because that's their responsibility. Align with the product team, set the vision, and really build that external narrative. The challenge here is that when it comes to building sales assets, it all has to be contextualized for what the salespeople are going through. So saying we're going to create new messaging, that's not useful unless it's integrated into your motion. So you may say, hey, we're going to create a new business deck, right? Or we're going to create a new executive deck that's used in these very specific instances. So the people who are the cooks in the kitchen, you definitely have the seller to the head of sales. You have your marketing team. Maybe you'll have enablement. But you are going through and interviewing sales, customer success to understand what's working and what's not. You get that team together. But in my experience, product marketing is holding the pen. Right? They do the wordsmithing. They do the wordsmithing there.
I like it. I have a question. So I've been rolled out on, which is like, multiple companies where new messaging's presented. And I'm curious, like, how do you, as you're in that creation process, how do you battle like the loudest in the room? Right. And here's what I mean, like anecdotal, like, you know what I mean? Like maybe it's a rep, maybe, who knows, maybe the top enterprise rep is in on like a, for kind of an iteration round or, hey, we're working on it, want some feedback. And I'm not villainizing reps. It could be anybody, but How do you get the tone? Oh, Tony, that would never work. Okay, Devin, how do you know? Well, I've been on 3 calls this week and they said
Yep.
this, right? So that's the anecdotal, and there's value there, right? I wouldn't say completely discount, but how do you balance that with, like, I don't know, any actual data that you have to say, I hear you, Devin, and you're probably right for those calls, but in the bigger scheme,
Yeah.
here's some data or here's something to back it up. You know what I mean?
Yeah. You always get loudest person in the room and recency bias every time, right? You
Yeah,
get
exactly.
that's in every one of these things. I think that this is where having trust in the partnership between marketing and some of the salespeople is going to be most important, because it's even when you have trust, it's hard to navigate that like political dynamic of it.
Yeah.
In terms of pulling data in, I don't know how you actually pull it in. I'm sure Gong has some good ideas, but I'd like by looking at what's being used, win rates, who's actually being effective. I think that is very true. Whether you're using Gong to analyze it or whether you're saying, yeah, this person is top rep, but it's all from install base. Like there's all those things that you look at where you do want to gather the information, but you want to go wide enough. Here's a mistake people make. They go too wide, right? The messaging for a company, you can gather a lot of input, that's fine, but then you got to get smaller and smaller so there's a small working group. And one of my organizations, we didn't have a new business deck or core messaging, but we had some ideas that were laid out there from our founder. And we took that, played with it, and when I showed up, it was my first week at a previous company. I walked in, and it was CRO, heads of sales, AEs, marketing, head of marketing in a room, and they were all talking about building the business deck. And it was like, we were in Washington, D.C. This was what I was looking at. They walked through the deck, and I was like, hey, time out. I'm the new guy here. Can I be super critical and like be a little judgy here? And yeah, I got the nod from my CRO. I said, everything I'm seeing here looks like it is a product of compromise. It looks like everybody has their own slide that they use, like that AE who comes in hot, who's like, this is our architecture slide we should use.
Yep.
Right? In my experience, we basically have to say, is it possible for us to take the input of the favorite slides and then build something net new? Because otherwise, everybody's going to be telling a different story in a different direction. So like sometimes
100%.
if you walk into this messaging thing late, you kind of have to say, something stinky in here, like permission to say that. Because these things are like congressional bills, and what comes out the other end is so watered down, it satisfies individual constituencies, but the actual thrust or the whole reason for it is lost. So I try to get people out of the room, get a small committed group to make a straw man, straw woman, straw person, right, version. And then we go back to the group. When I go back, like in my like mental checklist, because I think there is kind of like a format to follow this. After we've got to the point where we've agreed, yes, we need this change, and we've actually sized how big the change needs to be, because, like I said, it takes a long time to build the messaging and market, but it also takes a long time to build the mental models in the world of the AEs to be able to apply that. But once we've gotten through those 2 hurdles of yes, we need this, and it's a meaningful change on top of a scaffolding that everybody already knows, that's when like the work starts. In my experience, having built these things that have visual components as well as a storyline, I always put my focus on, let's first build the outline. And maybe I'm going to get too technical here or like too granular, Devin, but it is a single page with 1 column that has the name of the slide and the like TLDR, what is the emotion the customer should be feeling? Like there's a pain. It's only getting bigger, right? There's going to be winners and losers. Like if that's how this is being contextualized into a new business deck, you get that. So the story arc in high, then you have the bullet points. You don't write in long form, etc. You get that, and then you get that concept approved before you start putting pen to paper. Sometimes I'll draw a picture, take a photo of it, what a slide could look like, because what you don't want to have people doing is talking about the storyline and somebody saying, maybe these arrows should go in the other direction, or maybe you should use a different story point. It's the small macro things that really do matter on derailing something about this, because we need the input from the team on the story arc. Then we can go away, like on the messaging, And then we come back around when we have something for them to opine on and weigh in on slide-wise. And when you share it back with them, when you get to the world of slides, the trick, open up Zoom, record yourself doing the 7-minute slide presentation, and make them watch that. Don't do it live in the meeting because you won't get through it. So I'll get in the meeting, I'll press play, man, and then nobody can talk for 7 minutes, and then we solicit feedback so you avoid that whole it's coming in slide 4, it's coming in slide 6. Just clean. So those are some things, like little pro tip. You've gotten that far, and then you go and test in the field before you do the full rollout. We can talk about rollout strategy too. If there's interest.
I'm gonna add one granular question, then we'll get to the mini rollout. Is so here's my thing, and I've been on both, right? I've been on sales, I'm in marketing, so I say this with love to my product marketing folks if you're listening. I think sometimes maybe it's that bullet point outline, maybe it's the next phase, is the language gets really, I call it product marketing, which is phrasing and words that we don't really use in everyday life, right? And I know
extensibility, whatever it may be.
I don't say that in the kitchen at home. I don't say it with my friends, obviously, too often, unless we're talking about work. But and I do understand there is a language and a lexicon, right, when you're in a business meeting. I'm not going to ignore that. But a lot of times the language, you go to a sales team and they're like, no one talks like this. Our prospects aren't going to really resonate with it. There's a couple of keywords I'm sure you want to hit on, my value prop. But I'm curious, how do you kind of combat that, or is it a compromise, or I don't know, in your drafting of that outline or the actual messaging, how do you kind of balance the things we need to say as an org, but then the realistic what will happen in the trenches and in the field?
Well, good question. The reality is, what's going to happen? You're a seller. You're going to do what you need to do to move the deal, right? And I'm saying that as in, if I have something that's talking about extensibility or single pane of glass, all those buzzwords that really do matter, if you're a marketer talking to Forrester or Gartner and trying to hit on your buzzwords and keywords, it depends on your style of sales and your style of selling and your personality of the buyer. But my style is really conversational like yours. It was when I was at AE, hey, let's talk about it. Here's what this means. This is where the partnership from sales is going to matter. Because as we're doing this back and forth, where you have sellers giving input, you have the final person who gives the thumbs up is your sales leader. The sales leader has to be willing to say, I understand the story arc. I've been involved at these key check-ins, but we're not going to use the word extensibility. It's not natural. Right. So we're not going to use that. Marketing, you can show it on the slide if you want, but let's talk about how we actually, what are some other words we can use? And where this comes to is after we think about the steps, we have approval on the storyboard and we've got some bullets of what we're saying on each slide. Then we kick over and we say, let's get a few sellers to take this in the field. Let's record the interactions and let's see what's happening. And you put a time frame on that and you just ask a couple sellers to do it. Not everybody, a few a few who understand it. And then you come back and they tell you if there was organ rejection, like tremendous failure from the customer, right? You're looking for the blinky red. And then based upon that, if you start to feel good, maybe make some minor edits, then you get the green light from the sales org, and then it's time to do the rollout. And that's an important next step of how do you actually get it out in the hands. Yeah.
Two quick questions and we'll go to full rollout. We'll use big round numbers are easy for me. 100. I've got 100 sellers, Tony. How many are you picking, or percentage? Yeah, I'm going for the percentage. What percentage? 4 to 5%. So a very small group.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
At this early, I am.
How long do you put them in the field, or maybe it's call velocity? Because obviously that's
I got you. It's maybe I mean, if they're good question for me. Traditionally, with our types of sales, where you're doing 3 calls a day. 2 to 3 calls a day. I think it's probably 3 weeks, 2 weeks, and you're checking in regularly. Here's the deal: is they have to do it because if I'm a seller and I'm not interested in trying the new deck, I'm not ruining my quota. I'm not you got to figure out who the right sellers are, and they're going to be the ones who are potentially on the squad that's helping with some of the iterations of it. Sure. But sellers will give you honest feedback. They will. and they'll tell you
Here's
what
the
works and
slide
what
people
didn't work.
loved. Here's the slide I got stuck. It didn't make sense. They asked questions. I didn't really have good answers. And that's not always a cut the slide. It's like, I just
That's
need more
right.
enablement because like some unexpected objections came up, or even not all questions are objections, but you know what I mean? Like conversation took a left. I didn't really know how to guide it. So yeah.
Yeah, you got to figure out, is it the messaging? Is it the seller's ability to handle the messaging, or was it just a kind of punk buyer, right? That does happen, who's just like doesn't buy it or is just busting your chops. Like that's why you try to do it for you get a little bit of a sample size. But again, I'm looking for organ rejection because I did what I gave to the seller at the beginning is kind of good enough in the sense that I think this can, like, I'm not giving them a beta version. I'm giving them what I believe we can take forward and go forward. After you do that, then you do get some of the rollout.
Beta version.
What do you say?
No seller's going to be like, "Oh, Tony, you're half baked, and you want me to take it to market? Yeah, let me just do that for you." Like, no, they're going to want something not final but concrete.
Yeah, concrete that they can. I mean, you got to keep in mind, like, we knock as a seller, like we knock us as being coin operated. Like, this is how we pay for the holidays. Like, it has real implications. So yeah,
For sure.
I think that it's you got to give them something that you're confident that works, versus just asking them to do some market intelligence and market testing. That's not going to help me get my quota.
With all due respect to your new deck, I'm not putting my Hawaiian vacation this Christmas at risk to test it. Well,
Totally. Yes, that's right.
All right, Tony. So we've built our, concrete, not finalized, but then we rolled it out to a small group. Now we're feeling good, right? So we're in a place to roll this thing out. What's like? Give me the high level here, and examples are welcome. How are you rolling this thing out across the other 95 reps from our example?
So I'll give you an example. I'll generalize it a little bit, but an example over when we were at Datadog. So in 2018, a little bit before that, Datadog, we noticed that there was a trend happening in the observability space, right? Observability is letting you look into your infrastructure of are your data centers or data centers in the cloud working, your code working, et cetera, okay? And what was happening is we were noticing this trend where people were talking about the 3 pillars of observability, right? And what that was indicative of is that the buyers themselves, historically, companies had gone to and sold point solutions of, I have a solution for monitoring your infrastructure. I have a solution for monitoring your traces or your code, your application, right? Mm-hmm. I have a tool and a story for monitoring your logs, which is data that's generated just inside the tech stack. And companies formed across each of these silos. And what became apparent is that that's how the companies were going to market. But the way the buyers were buying, where they said, forget all of that. I have a problem to solve. How can I solve this outage? Because every 5 minutes down, it's costing me X dollars. So we hooked onto this idea of 3 pillars of observability, which is basically taking our bread and butter of our product, something we did really well on infrastructure, and then folding in the idea that we do one of these really strong, but we also can integrate with your other platforms and see value. So as we found this messaging, we knew this message was resonating. We started to pilot a few things. We worked with our chief product officer, who was outstanding over at Datadog. And he's like, I'm seeing this. I'm feeling this. Our IT team or our product team, like we know this because we're living it. This is the problem. So with that, we said, how do we take that lofty concept and distill it down to something that all the sales team can understand? We built the deck using the messaging, incorporated the deck using what we had talked about here. So how do you roll it out? We took that deck. We had the deck itself. We had the script for the deck written out in a very specific format. And then we had a recording of somebody doing the deck. When we got everybody together for the QBR, right, where all the people were in the office, what we did was we took that deck. We gave it maybe 2 days before to somebody junior on the team who had just joined. And then during that kickoff event or QBR, whatever it is, I got up there with my buddy from product marketing. We said, here's the deck. We're going to watch the product marketer do the deck. He did it elegantly. We then handed out the scripts, right? We then said, now you're going to watch somebody who joined 2 weeks ago deliver the deck. They did it, everybody claps. And then we say, it's time to watch some train wrecks. Partner with the person sitting next to you, groups of 4. The person who's the newest to the company goes first. I want you to cold read this. And by having them do the cold read, it's a table read. It's a table read. By having them do that, the biggest thing is always the hurdle of trying something new. So if you basically rip off that Band-Aid and they stumble through and they're like, gosh, I sounded like a clown, the other people are going to go, no, that was kind of fine. But the idea is they do it. It wasn't that bad. And then the next person does it and they're giving feedback. But by ripping off that and making people apply it and take it for a test drive, that removes the fear of adoption. And then people will start using it in the field. So that's how I always intro it. You want to back that up with some sort of certification. That's a normal process of, we've seen it. Now your manager must certify your ability to deliver. So managers are signing off. You would certify the managers on their ability first as an enablement team. But you would get the certifications. Those can be rolled up. And when you're doing certifications, when you think about like data, I'm always looking for people who are not completing the certification and trying to determine, is that an issue with the individual contributor? Or were 6 out of 8 people on Devin's sales team non-compliant? Because then it's not an IC problem, it's a Devin problem. So we're always thinking about that and using metrics. You could also deploy Gong. I've done that in the past, of looking for some of those keywords and figuring out, are these keywords being used and when are they being used in the sales cycle? That's another way that I measure it. The final call out I would see of a mistake here is when you roll something like this out, you talk about having too many cooks in the kitchen. On the day you roll it out, once people start using it, you're going to immediately start getting feedback on things to change. Don't change it for a month. Just sit, marinate on it, because what one person thinks you should change is something that somebody else thinks is great. And you don't want to have multiple decks and versions out there. So you put it out. We had confidence already that we were doing it the right way. You put it out, you marinate on it, and then the changes you make, small tweaks, right? Small tweaks. And then future iterations, when you need to change, Devin, when the economy changes in another way, try to preserve as much as the old deck, try to preserve as much of the old deck's aesthetics so that the sellers don't feel this is a full burn it down and build it up, but it's a slight modification of the messaging, right? The more you can minimize the shift in the mind of the sellers and make it integrated into the way of we're already working, into your natural operating, that's how you get the win of the messaging when you're trying to change the behaviors in the field. That's how you adjust. So I think we kind of deviated to like a very from when is it time to change your messaging to like a very practical kind of like checklist on how to do this. For people who are listening.
I think that's,
it's going to be different at companies, but there's value in that like tactical approach.
Well, for sure. I think it was perfect the way that it unfolded. And it's funny as you're saying the last thing, like we all know people don't love change, but marketers, I think, love change a lot more than salespeople do, because it's like fun to create and build something new. It's like, cool, I get to do, and that's me included. But then when it's like, you think like your point of salespeople, like change is risk to their quota, uncertainty, all like, ironically, kind of the things we started with, risk and uncertainty in the market. Like, let's not add that to our sales team unnecessarily.
Yeah,
I like
totally.
It a lot.
And it's where boring ass stuff leads to scalability if you have it right. Like predictability and scalability is the name of the game. Like that's how we got to the hundreds of sellers. Like you have to have like principled, repeatable process. This is something that I geek out on. Like I really do love it. That's why there's a system for rolling out new messaging and developing new messaging. But it has to be repeatable. You want to minimize change and work within mental models the customer has, but also mental models the field has. And that's how you get the adoption. Because strategy, poorly implemented, you can't blame the strategy. You got to rule out the operational variability by saying we have a system, we have a process, this is designed to scale. And if we follow it, we can know that we ran the play right. The play was just poorly designed. Until you've got your process down, which again is super boring, but critical. Until you got the process down, you can't blame the plays the coach is calling in from the sideline. So whole nother conversation on that. Yeah.
That's for part two. For
Part
part
two.
two, for a future day. Well, dude, Tony, thank you truly for hanging out with us, sharing your wisdom, expertise, some examples. So I think you gave the listeners a lot to think about, and hopefully some actionable takeaways if folks were taking notes. So thanks for hanging.
That's my
Man.
hope. That's my hope. So I think I'm on the hook for 16 and a half hours of hard labor for you that I still owe you back from the time that we lost in our sales cycle. But I'm here, and thanks, Devin. Yeah, good jamming.
Good part is I'll take like a conversion from like beers to hours, so we can just get a couple drinks and
We can do
and
that.
catch up.
Awesome.
All right, my man. Until next time.
See you, everyone.